Women's Day, it has been a bit of a competition to our event here, right? So there's a lot of things are happening right now in the morning, you know, in the UN. But I'm very glad that you guys took the time to still come. We have a very exciting session coming up in the next hour. So my name is Norbert. I work with the Office of HR here at the UN. I have the great pleasure to work with a fantastic team in performance management, career development, and learning. So that topic today is really close to our heart, and I will tell you in a second a little bit more why is it so close. I will have the pleasure to introduce the session today, but let me first make a shout out to those who actually made this possible. So we have Leila and Anton from the UN who make sure that this seventh session for this innovative SIOP and UN relationship morning / midday meetings are taking place. So these are the two who make it possible from the UN side. And I think we have Lori, we have Amy, we have Nabila, and we have Walter from SIOP, who on the other hand really formed that relationship. So thank you guys for holding on so long together with us and moving it on the path forward. The point of this innovation learning series is really that we have an opportunity to kind of step out of our busy workday for at least 1 hour, step out of our very specific UN context and open up the minds to hear what's happening elsewhere. And for that I think we have managed to bring in a range of very interesting speakers who come from a very different place, either in the corporate world, in academia, or somewhere else in the non-profit environment, and tell us about topics that we are constantly working on, but from a very broad and a perspective that we don't necessarily bring to the table every day. So that's really the focus of this program. We are going to move forward with more sessions during 2019. I believe it's the first session in 2019, so also congratulations to that. So today we are talking about strategic 360-degree feedback. Hi Floresha, there's one spot right there. Strategic 360-degree feedback, it's so close to us because we have at least 2 big initiatives in the organization moving forward on a pilot basis to bring 360 into the UN much more systematically. So one is 360 for senior leaders, for our USGs and ASGs. We have never had this before. So we're just in the process of finishing up a pilot on having our senior officials be exposed to feedback from all angles. And then we are also working on a program to bring 360 feedback to all of the workforce and not just to specific groups as we had in the past, where we had certain leadership roles, mid-management getting 360, but bringing it to everyone. So we are piloting all of this right there as we speak. The team is sitting on that corner, and I'm sure there will be lots of questions. And there's also other initiatives in the organization. The colleagues in peacekeeping have been doing 360 for SRSGs and DSRSGs. That's also a project that's wrapping up. So many things are happening. So really looking forward to grilling you a little bit, David, on the thoughts that you have on this. Dr. David Bracken is joining us. He is a professor for industrial and organizational psychology at Kaiser University. K-E-I. So that's my English. Is it Kaiser? Is that correct?
That's right.
Kaiser.
Kaiser. It's one of the biggest actually universities in the state of Florida, actually. And I teach online.
Yeah. So you're based in Atlanta, but Kaiser University in the graduate school there. David is a master in the world of feedback and coaching, in the world of, I think, also employee surveys, something else that we do, a staff engagement survey, performance management, competency development. Right? He has been working as a staff in Xerox, among other companies in Bell South, and also as a consultant to many organizations. One thing that I'm looking forward to is I think you have a book coming out soon, right? You co-edited with the very humble title, Handbook of Strategic 360 Feedback, right?
That's right.
It's nothing less than a handbook. And I think we are going to have the opportunity to see a chapter of this in the course of the meeting. That would be great. So watch out for the
May
handbook
1st.
coming, May 1st, coming around the corner. Okay, so I don't want to hold you up anymore. I think Nabila, whether you want to say a couple of words, right?
Yes.
On the SIOP, and then
Yes,
over to
absolutely.
you.
Yep, thank you, Norbert. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nabila Sheikh, and I'm here on behalf of the SIOP UN Committee, along with my fellow few committee members that are here, Lori, Amy, and Walter. The SIOP UN Committee is essentially a subcommittee of SIOP, which is the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology, and it's really focused on bringing theory, research, and practice of IO psychology to the UN. One of the initiatives and ways we do that is this innovation learning series. So we bring IO experts like David today to the UN to share with you best practices in the world of IO in hopes that you can get that knowledge sharing and implement it in your own way at the UN. So really, the purpose of our committee is in partnering with the UN to help you achieve your sustainable development goals. And other ways that we do that besides the learning series is also pro bono work that comes out some of the UN agencies. And we essentially tap into the IO experts across the field with the pro bono projects that come to us from the UN. Again, in hopes that there's knowledge sharing and best practice that can happen at the UN through the partnership that we have. We also have Walter here, who's a member of PCUN, so the Psychology Coalition of NGOs, and is a representative of SIOP as a practice area amongst the other psychology associations that are part of PCUN. We also are involved in the UN Global Compact. Walter, right here. And
I think we also have another Walter in the room. So I don't know.
oh, you do? This Walter right here then. So we also have, lastly, the partnership with the UN Global Compact, and that's essentially, I'm sure all of you are familiar with it, but the set of principles that companies sign on to and commit to follow for sustainability and anti-corruption and sort of environmental responsibility in organizations. So the SIOP UN Committee also plays a role in recruiting and signing on companies for that global compact. So those are just a few of the kind of key initiatives that we lead to, again, in the hopes of helping the UN achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And any of the committee members are here afterward to kind of help you learn more. And I'll hand it over to David.
All right.
We also have an info sheet we can give out toward the end of the session.
So, well, thank you all for having me come talk. My problem will be that I have so much I want to say, but I want to give plenty of time for you all to ask a lot of questions. This is a very potentially complex topic because there's just so many decisions that are so critical about implementing a system. So, but I was told, and suggested that I don't assume that kind of anybody knows anything, and everybody doesn't know what even 360 feedback is, let alone strategic 360 feedback. And thanks for the gracious introduction, Norbert, and it was great to see Walter here. Walter and I have known each other about 10 years, I think. Plus, it's nice to have somebody of my generation. But this is the book, yes. So, Handbook of Strategic 360 Feedback. I know a lot of you know Alan Church. John Fleener's at the Center for Creative Leadership, and Dale Rose has his own business where he does almost all 360s employee surveys. And if you know, I'm going to get to Marshall Goldsmith actually in a minute, because I wanted to start off by telling you kind of how I got to this point, because some of my students and stuff say, how do you know it's Dr. Bracken? That's the only place people call me Dr. Bracken. It's like the university, so people call me Dave. Dr. Bracken, how did you get to this point in your career and over the span of like 40 years? So, as Norbert mentioned, I did start off at Xerox. That was my first job. I was ABD, actually, out of Georgia Tech. But very rapidly, they had a personal research group, and they gave me the employee survey program to run, selection systems for their 10,000, what they called then tech reps. Now they're called customer service reps, I think. from when there used to be copiers to go visit at your location. Some performance management work, and then they did a lot of assessment center work there. And so I got exposed to all those things. And assessment centers, which is an important thing, and again, a lot of people don't know what assessment centers are. They're not places, they're technologies, processes, where candidates for a position go through in groups, go through simulated activities that are designed to replicate jobs that they haven't held yet. For example, at Xerox it was for branch managers. We had 80 branches, 40,000 employees across the US. And so the branch manager job was like the stepping stone that you wanted to be one of those. So we designed an assessment center that people who were identified as potential candidates would gather for like a whole week and go through simulations, take some tests, individual simulations, group simulations, but the key things, you have trained observers, right? So who rate the folks and then give them developmental feedback, and then eventually though, it's used to help make decisions. Everybody can't be a branch manager, right? You have to make some decisions. So that's an important part of that story. Then actually I went to a consulting firm for a year and a half to just do only assessment centers. And they got bought out by Wilson Learning, and so then that kind of went away. So that's when I ended up with Bell South. Bell South in 1985 when I got there was a they called it a one-year-old company with a 100-year-old history. It was one of the 7 baby Bells that was created. And as from the breakup of AT&T, who was really big in assessment centers then, and they were a leader in that field, all that came to Bell South. We ran the assessment centers for the 7 baby Bells, so I had to do more assessment centers. They asked me to design an employee survey program that was parallel with the new values, because I had this new company and those CEOs said, here's the 5 values, design an employee survey that reflects the unique business we're trying to create here. And then one day, Marshall Goldsmith comes to town. And so this was 33 years ago. And he was, I don't know if that name rings a bell, but now he's like one of the top 10 executive coaches. Back then, he was just part of Keelty, Goldsmith, and Booth. The CEO wanted to have a leadership development process and put the top 1,500 leaders through this leadership development process. And one of the foundations was going to be upward feedback. So I was on a committee that helped design, we'd say, what questions are we going to ask to tap into the behaviors that parallel those 5 values? I mean, some of them, everybody would have respect for the individual, customer first, but then there was like positive response to change was one. And one had to do with community. And so I was on the committee to help debate what behaviors leaders had to exhibit to show what does that mean, respect the individual. That can mean a ton of things. And so we had that debate, came up with an instrument, and unfortunately, I was like leader 1499, so I had to get some of that same feedback like that. And I say unfortunately because I really wasn't very good at it in retrospect. But I did see the power of it. So I saw the power of this upward feedback, anonymous feedback through questionnaires. It didn't have a name back then. I don't even know what we called it. The term 360 feedback didn't come into place until, well, the first book came out in 1996 called 360-degree feedback, and Mark Edwards tried to copyright that name and spent the rest of his professional life chasing people down, trying to sue them. So, unsuccessfully, so he finally gave up and sold the business to Right Management. So the reason I'm going through all that is that we have all these assessment tools, unlike when we think of assessments traditionally, where you sit down and take a test around your personality or cognitive ability or maybe. There's a whole set of assessments that where the data's not generated by the focal person, but it's generated by others. So you're actually adding a whole level of complexity and potential unreliability while adding potentially more validity to it by having, adding reliability and validity by having multiple people respond to the focal person. So whether, we all know what performance appraisal is, unfortunately, right? Where the boss is usually the other, that sort of thing. We just talked about assessment centers. employee surveys where the focus is really more of the organization than a person. But then I did a lot of that, and I was representative to the Mayflower Consortium for both Bell South and Xerox. So I put it at the confluence here. When I saw what this was going on, I wrote my first article in 1993 called Straight Talk about multi-rater feedback. It says, what are the best practices based on what we've learned from all these different, about what works and doesn't work, about questionnaires and raters and training raters and how to get the best information, data management, all the things that come into play on it. So that's serendipity that I was mentioning, was that I had all these experiences when Marshall Goldsmith came knocking with this really interesting process. People provide feedback to their bosses through an instrument, and then we had to do, we did get a coach for 1 hour, or something, and then we were on our own, that sort of thing. I saw that confluence there, saying, if we can take advantage of the good things that we've learned from all these things, maybe we could create an assessment tool. It already kind of existed out there as just a feedback management development tool. So the notion of saying, well, actually, let's look at it. Can we help make decisions based on this information if we do it right? We said, oh, you can't do that. And so we're still having some of that debate. And that's what strategic 360 feedback is. It is 360 feedback, and I will tell you what that 360 feedback is, that is used to make decisions. Basically, that's what it is. So if somebody has, if somebody else wants to write another book about using 360 feedback to develop individual leaders, go at it. Our book is about using 360-degree feedback to make decisions aligned with the organization's priorities. So, go ahead and raise your hands and stop me if I jump ahead too fast around this. So what is 360? So it's 360 is saying that we're getting full view of a person. So self, you could think of self here as being right in the middle, is getting rated not only by himself, but by his manager or direct reports, if you have any, peers and colleagues, and then perhaps others, like you work on some project teams. The key is that it's people who know you well enough to be able to provide reliable observations about your behavior in the workplace. So that's one of the literally dozens. I think when I was consulting around this, we had like 8 pages of decisions to sit down with, starting with what color do you want your logo, to all the way to saying, okay, how are we going to pick who these people are, and how many do we need in order to make this. And I understand there's some people here from more of a legal perspective. One of the things that I will emphasize is that if we're going to use it to make decisions about people, we have to do it consistently. I think that if people say, well, what about the legality of doing this and doing that? And I say, I think we can provide best practices around providing good information, but if you don't do it consistently, then you can open up Pandora's box, having people then complain, and rightly so, that everybody's not on a level playing field, whether it might be. So what I'd like to do is kind of bring this to life by showing some stuff, and actually this will look familiar to Walter, because some of these formats are ones that we used, and probably still do use. I'm not with Work Vitality anymore, but when he was at it, but they do a good job at what they do. So it's a little bit of a, if you're wondering where this comes from, that's where it comes from. So I wanted to put this slide up. It's just a page from the report. So after we collect ratings from people, we go through all the decision-making processes about who those people are going to be. And usually the manager selects them. The person selects them, and the manager has to approve them, and so forth. And the more people you include, the higher your reliability, typically. But I wanted to show you this slide, mostly just give you a sense of what some of the questions might look like. So this happened to be a slide about John Davis's hidden strengths. And a hidden strength happens to be one where there's a gap of at least 1.0 between, on a 5-point scale. Okay, so you can get anywhere from 1.0 to 5.0. Scales are a whole other topic that actually I do have a slide on later, one more big complicating factor. It's common as agree, disagree, from strongly agree to strongly disagree. And this shows that places where John's self-score, he rated himself 3.5, and these other 18 people rated him a 4.5, on encourages other people to express ideas and perspectives, so we call that a hidden strength. In other words, people think that John's better at that than he does himself. So we have a page for discussion, and there's a corresponding page about gaps, where the gap goes in the other direction, where you think you're better than your raters do. And usually the gap page is much longer than the strength is. Sometimes this page is blank. If you give yourself all 5s, you're not going to have anything on this page. People do that. So I wanted to show you two things. One, some sample behaviors, and we try to keep it as behavioral as we can, and not so much judgmental. And then they come in dimensions or categories of topics. I am in the business of, I've never used an off-the-shelf 360 tool. And one of the primary requirements for strategic 360 feedback is that has to be aligned with the priorities and goals of the organization. Very hard to do if you buy one off the shelf. So all the work that I do is to first do like Marshall did, and come in and say, okay, what are your values and what are the behaviors that represent those values, or whatever your competency model, or whatever you want to work off of, to create some content for that. And we put them into dimensions for a couple of reasons that probably aren't that important to get into right now. And I'll show you on the report how we use them. Is that okay so far? Okay. Too slow. So this will make your eyes cross. But this is just to show you a sample report, and this is a dimension summary for John, the same John, as well as 18 respondents. And it's broken out by, we give John overall self-manager, direct report, and peer scores, and as long as there's typically three people in this category, we present scores. And that's an anonymity protection factor. Employee surveys often use that. Employee surveys often use 5 people, but that's because you work with much larger numbers. That's one of the challenges is these types of 360 processes with small work groups. So, what I want you to really walk away from this display is how transparent it is. We are giving John, the focal person, as much information as we can. Some of the stuff I've written in the past, and when I talk about there's dozens and dozens of decisions that you have to make to design this. And one article I did that was called 360-degree feedback from another angle says when you walk through these decisions, they all really pretty much, you can identify a stakeholder, whether it's John, the feedback provider, his 18 raters in the organization. There's 3 groups of stakeholders that if you ask them how they would decide to do certain things, what would they prefer? And they're usually in conflict. So you have to decide who of the stakeholders are you going to favor in making decisions. And generally, my philosophy is we should make decisions that help focal persons most. And if that means we perhaps, people say we shouldn't show this much information because John might try to guess who was making what ratings on this sort of thing, and that does happen, but we have ways to coach John not to do that. And we still use the anonymity rule. So you're not anonymous if you're the self, and you're not anonymous if you're the manager. But direct reports and peers, we have that rule, at least 3 persons. So I don't want to, so so that in communication there are 8 items, and that's why these numbers are so big, because all these 18 people are answering 8 items. So that's what we're showing here. That's why these numbers are big. And then we have, I don't know if I have it in here or not, but we don't. We have a similar page, then it breaks out all the communication items one at a time, but uses the same display. But the point being that I think we should help John understand as much as he can about where this is coming from, and not try to guess as to, in this really artificial form of communication that 360 is, like people filling out a questionnaire and then trying to figure out what it is that they're telling you, and then but there is a solution to that problem too, and a good one. So, questions? I mentioned sample scales. This is again another one of the decisions. We won't spend a lot of time on this, but some rating scales are better than others. Dale Rose, one of the 4 of the co-authors I have, does every 2 years. His company does a benchmark study. His last one had like 200 companies in it, and they're primarily companies that use 360s for decision making. And it's about 75% companies still use the agree-disagree scale. I think it's probably because people are so used to it and comfortable with it from using employee surveys. I think that it's much too vague as to have people understand why they're telling you what you're telling you. And so I like something more like this normative scale where we try to guide them. And there's great inflation that happens. That's the other one of the other arguments. It doesn't tell us anything because everybody gets all 5s. If we start to anchor the good point as competent, comparable to others, create that reference group, which is really the people that they're competing with, potentially like the assessment centers I mentioned. They say, so how does this person perform comparable to her peers? Then, are they better than most, or like a role model in the top 5 or 10%? Then you can't go down and rate give somebody all 5s. That person does not exist. So there are things we're trying to achieve with sample rating scales. So in the handbook, Chris Rotolo and I have a chapter on how can we improve rater performance. It's the longest chapter in the book. It's 40 pages long. Saying how, and this is one of the things we talk about, how do people use rating scales, and how can we help them use rating scales. And it's not just a matter of turning over to them, but also talking about rater trainings and other methods. So this is a big decision. And it also gets into, I'll just tell you a little story. I had one client when I was back in consulting. This was their scale. I call it evaluative here. And they wanted it done in 14 languages. And the client had the responsibility of doing the back translation, taking the translations and then translating them back into English to see if they still made sense. And then when I saw these come back in Hebrew going in the wrong direction and Arabic, I just know some of them were like this long, couldn't you put on the page? I said, why does it take so many words to say good? Well, it turned out that the translators said, this scale doesn't have meaning in this culture that you're asking us to translate to, so we'll make up our own. The person at the company went on vacation, and they said, we're going to skip this step of doing the back translation. Okay? And so it went out. It was and it was a big deal. It was there's 700 top leaders were getting feedback. And the whole thing exploded, as you can imagine. And then, of course, I got blamed for it. So, well, you guys said you were supposed to do this. You didn't do that. So, well, it doesn't matter. So I learned a lesson partly about translatability, too, and keeping that in mind. I don't claim to be an expert on cultural awareness and fairness, but that was a lesson in itself. One of the things that Chris and I do in this is I wanted to just introduce this topic to, is to use this, I've developed this model called Alamo that you can use to apply to whenever you want to analyze performance. So when you have suboptimal performance,